Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Let's give them a warm round of applause.
Hi, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Carolina, can you say your name for us one more time?
Karolina Waclawia.
Okay, thank you very much. It's so great to be here with Carolina. Our first books came out at the same time, and we met that way. And we met up for drinks, and I was like touching her face by like the second beer. We just really liked each other. I don't touch everyone's face.
God, I feel so lucky.
Yeah.
That was a wonderful experience. Yeah. Everyone should be so lucky to get Kathleen to touch her face.
Anyway, so I'm going to read a little bit, and then we're going to talk about the book. I am reading a section from the relative beginning of the novel, which deals with the tenants of this brownstone building in New York that are slowly losing their kind of maternal landlord to dementia. And this concerns the landlord, whose name is Edith. Since the days when Myrtle Avenue around the corner was nicknamed Murder for cautionary reasons, the days before crews from the city came to dismantle the yellow cane seats and leather hand straps at the elevated train, the days when men who built ships at the Navy Yard used to travel in packs with their cigarettes rolled up in their sleeves and curtsy at women and hoot, the days when several generations of family overflowed onto their stoops in the summer. 66 years she had spent at the same window. Of course, there was much that remained. The magisterial art students from the nearby institute, their fashion shifting, but their insolence and unwieldy bags of supplies the same. The steady pour between 6 and 7 o'clock of those with jobs in Manhattan, the grunting up their stairs nearly collective. At her core, Edith believed herself to be the same person she'd been at 5, 12, 23, and so aging was mostly a point of interest, almost an entertainment were it not for its increasingly tangible interceptions in her daily life. Were these really her veins, a purple so bright as to seem inorganic, her hair thin and staticky, so reluctant to cooperate? She forgot sometimes that these were hers, and more recently other things, gaps she found amusing or depressing, depending. Using a can opener became a deliberate, thought-through act. While reading, she had to concentrate, or else she was likely to follow some memory around a low-lit corner. Her daughter Jenny's first birthday, the living room vibrant then and filled to the ceiling with balloons the baby didn't know whether to carouse with or to fear. She and Declan just married and new owners of the building, naked and sweating out August in one of the apartments yet to be rented, her linen dress balled under her head as a buffer between her tawny waves and the hardwood floor, his expression so different than when he'd courted her with flowers. How feverish her sister June's eyes had gotten when she'd visited Brooklyn and then the city, how she'd marveled at Edith for going without hose and hailing black taxis. Owen, born second, surrounded by primarily colored blocks, content to play alone. The taxi he insisted on taking to college with money he'd saved. Declan, an Irish drinker with a nervous heart besides, buried 12 years now, and Jenny gone or dead more years than Edith had actually known and held her. The same building, their apartment unchanged, though the spring before Declan died, he'd had the whole thing repainted the color of milky coffee, had enjoyed sitting on the scaffolds with the men, yelling things down to her, and passing emptied glasses of lemonade back through the windows. Theirs had been a protected love, this fact reliable to her since the Navy Yard produced vessels as tall as 70 men, and even after he collapsed, finally, while applying lather to his face with the wide-bristled brush. It was another object she kept in a box full of things that told her the story of her life, and she fingered it some afternoons and felt wildly envious or obsessively tender, it being the last item that had touched the perfect line of his jaw. The tenants over the years had followed a cycle nearly generational, seeming to arrive and leave in demographic groups, their incomes growing and manner refining as the years went by. The couples who showed up with hands clasped, the women peering into the closets as if they might find another room or some other unexpected benefit, the men checking the locks on all the windows. Few in the decades of suburbia's blossoming, lasting more than a year after the appearance of children. When they knocked to return their keys, the towheads balanced on their hips and reaching for their mother's earrings, Edith always wished them well in their new lives. The present mix of renters was somewhat unlikely. That is, Edith might have thought so had she possessed the curiosity and energy to find anything at all very strange. She drank them in like tap water, unconcerned about their original source and the details of their travels to her, though she welcomed them in for coffee or tea, and always waved when they passed on the street. The young-seeming man in 2A, right above her, was certainly the kindest. And he smiled at her so broadly that she never minded the music he made, which filtered through his floor down to hers, a muddle of cymbals, an electronic keyboard, and fractured song. There was something wrong with him, she'd noted when he first moved in, a slant to his eyes and point to his ears and thud to his step. His sister, a tired woman in business attire, stopped by daily, her arms often full with groceries. Across the hall from Paul, who preferred Paulie, or just Pal, he joked, was another man, and he didn't look or behave young at all. He'd been there the longest, 15 years or 20, and had changed as much as the neighborhood. A stand-up comic, or had been, in the beginning and doing well, gigs at all the best clubs in the city at a time when New Yorkers lined up around the block for the chance to laugh and drink beer in those crowded sub-street spaces. Though things had slowed down for him, and he didn't seem all that funny anymore. Edward used to have people over, loud ones, who seemed to be competing with one another for the sonic space until the outbursts of synchronized laughter came, amplified by liquor. When Edith saw him now, he always seemed to be burdened, ascending the stairs slowly, sometimes sitting on the stoop for hours at a time with a pen and a small black notebook, rooted. She had once spotted him at the corner bodega, standing in front of the glass doors by the sick packs of imported lagers, and nearly approached but retreated when she noticed the shaking of his shoulders. On the third floor, Thomas. He reminded Edith of a professor, the way he thought so visibly, part of his forehead often wrinkled. A few weeks after it happened, he had recounted his stroke to her over tea with such grace that she had reached for his hand, the one he could feel, and squeezed. Struck with an urge to give him something, she hurried down to the long untouched portion of her closet, withdrew Declan's favorite sweater, neat with leather elbow patches. He had not recoiled at the dead man's cardigan, had instead pressed the wool to his face and breathed in, and after that he wore it regularly and always attached small notes or pressed flowers with his rent checks. When they appeared a few months later, Edith did not ask about the scars on his lifeless arm, the lines straight as grids of maps. His 34 years had done almost nothing to dull the glowing skin of boyhood, which made the slack left arm, the unmoving side of his face, even harder to witness. The girl across from Thomas in the last years of her 20s acted like something hunted. Edith doubted she'd seen Adeleine 4 times in the past year. She dressed much like Edith had when she'd first arrived in New York. Tailored wool skirts and silk gloves, hats with netted veils, leather clutches. Her hair crafted with the care that had disappeared from fashion long ago, her lips colored but not glossy as was typical of young women now. Either she came and went in the middle of the night, or she came and went very little, and her hands shook like underthings on a clothesline. The few times Edith had been up to the top floor recently, she had lingered outside Adeleine's door, drawn by the sounds, warm, crackling music, low but still audible, songs Edith had spent time with decades before. From the street, one could see the brown lace curtains that hid the girl, and the lights always on, attending to her as she fought off sleep. Thank you.
I wrote my questions down. Okay, so I loved this book, and it felt so intimate to me. I felt like you were letting us peek into the lives of a group of people living in this apartment building. And everyone was dealing with their own sort of decline, and Edith, I saw her as like the matriarch of the entire building. And I was just curious how you decided to build a world full of these kind of characters, and really, who came first?
That's so interesting. Well, I think that there were a couple characters who existed in short stories, but those iterations weren't, fully formed, or I wasn't fully satisfied with them. And all of the characters, I think what I figured out the best way to explain it is that all of the characters are attached to an issue that was very important to me at the time of the book's conception. Edith was important to me because I think that her maternal impulses are a little misguided, and they're a result of not feeling satisfied with the care she's provided to her actual family in the years preceding. And Adeleine's, fear of the digital age is one that's very similar to my fear of it. And so, yeah. A couple of them existed in various forms, and some of them were just a surprise. It was just kind of like a split-screen security camera, and I noticed that on camera 4 there was something that I hadn't seen before.
Oh, that's such an interesting way of talking about it. I mean, I feel like I've had characters too that'll show up somewhere and they're sort of still sticking with me or telling me there's more to the story than the small space I've given them, and they need more.
Yeah. And sometimes they're better formed in an arena or in a problem that hadn't occurred to you in the first time. Or there are other, I'm always fascinated by the things that certain writers keep, writing, and they're not always people. Like, this is a discursion, but Joy Williams has this thing where in 3 of her books, she has a character who is listening to a radio show that is called Action Line. And Action Line is a show where people call in and they're like, what's this dust that's falling on my house? How do I make a better lemon meringue pie? And there's this man who has all the answers, this very mysterious man. And the fact that shows up repeatedly is proof to me that we don't always know. We have to try a number of times,
to work it out.
Yeah.
The other thing I loved so much about the book was your sense of place, and the apartment building feels so finely drawn to me, and it feels as finely drawn as later in the book there's a motel room, and I just kept feeling like in every place you introduced to us, I was there. I could see it. I could smell the room. I could smell everything and touch everything. So I was just curious if you start with place first and build the rest, or what your process feels like.
Well, I think I'm definitely character-driven, but I think that I have a particularly obsessive memory for places. Since I was a kid, it seemed as though if I could really get down the color and the scent and the light of a place, then I would be able to determine the effects of that day upon me, if that makes any sense. So I think that the way that I come to a room is first by a character, and then kind of cinematically by just determining the sensorium, really.
It does feel like you write very visually, so I'm curious, in terms of, do you feel that film is an influence on how you think, or it just is what it is? It's a hard question to ask, why do you think the way you do? How do you do this? How do you do this, Kathleen?
I don't know. Maybe it's just one single childhood event that's no longer available to me, I don't know.
So there's a sense of confinement in the novel. A lot of the people in the book feel like they're trapped in this apartment building, but in a safe way. Some people, it's self-imposed, and others feel like they don't have a choice. Edith, it feels frightening for her to leave the apartment because of her dementia. But then you do this beautiful thing where you open the world. And without giving anything away, did you feel it was necessary to the novel to have people be able to leave?
It was something that I thought about a lot. And like certainly there's a kind of claustrophobia that I felt when I was writing, which I wanted to be, transmitted to the reader. But in the way like this wasn't like a center that would hold, and that was something that I knew from the beginning. And the way that they end up, separating themselves from the building was not in my head when I began. But I don't think that I ever thought that it would be able to stay within this situation that is, quickly becoming dangerous.
You have a lot of characters in the novel, and you were reading the section that you read sort of introduced them all and where they were in their lives at one point and where they are when we meet them. And it felt like everyone got equal billing, and it felt very balanced. And I was curious if that came naturally. Did it feel like a difficult thing? Did you feel like the book could only sustain so many people?
One of the characters that exist didn't exist initially, and maybe two of them came to be much more like fully defined than I expected they would. But I think that the way that happened was sort of like, you're in a car crash and there's an impact, and it's like felt throughout the vehicle, but it takes a little while to determine. And so, anytime anything happened in the plot, I had to like kind of go through the whole vehicle and see like where there were cracks or where there was a scratch or whichever, and that like kind of leads to a better understanding of character. But so anytime that anything happened, I was just like, looking around again, looking over my shoulder.
That's so interesting. Did it take a lot of drafts to get there? Like, while you were writing, if something happened, you'd say like, okay, how does this affect Paulie? How does this affect Edith? How does this affect Thomas? While you were in the midst of it, or did you go back?
No, I mean that is essentially how I work. But like when I went back and reread it, there were certain responses to events, with regard to one character or another that felt a little bit anemic, and so I would have to rework them or you just reconsider them.
There's a character, Paulie, who I just mentioned, who has Williams syndrome in the book, and it's clear you did a lot of research about that. And I was just curious if you could speak to the necessity for getting it right, and if you did research on other parts of the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit. It's a lot of responsibility to write about a syndrome in that way, and I spent some time with a family that had a 32-year-old relatively independent woman with Williams syndrome, and talking to both of them like independently and as a unit, but I was like careful not to transpose those circumstances onto the character. Can
you speak to what Williams syndrome is? In case
Yeah. So it's a neurodevelopmental disorder in which the people affected are by and large disabled, but they have these certain gifts. They're like personal lexicon is very unusual, and they're usually gifted in narrative, and 99% of them are in the ceiling of perfect pitch, so they're often really engaged with song and with music, and they're just these like very social, curious individuals who happen to have these other very real deficits. So, that's Williams syndrome, and I'm trying to think what other research that I did. Oh, well, there's this event in the end of the book that involves this rare behavior of a certain type of firefly. And I did do some research for that. I drove down through the Smoky Mountains and through some really hellish parts of the country, and what happened. Maybe almost got killed a couple times in Virginia.
By who? by who or what?
Well, so what happened is I was in this town that I think is called Bland, Virginia, and I was going to a swimming hole that is called Dismal Falls. I was really looking for a theme. Like, it was a crazy trip. Like, my mother had just died. I was a mess. I was having panic attacks. It was a really crazy thing to do. And I went into this store, and there was a newspaper that was called Crime Times. And Crime Times culls all local mugshots recently, and it has, like, the descriptions of the crimes that all people have committed. And some of these crimes committed are amazing. You know, it's like illegal possession of boat plus illegal possession of a wild animal. It was like the bookings were incredible. And I was so excited to see Crime Times. I obviously assumed it was a free weekly, that I just ran out of the gas station with it in my hand. And this woman came out yelling that I had to pay for the Crime Times. I was going to be in Crime Times. Yeah. Something else with some fishermen at a swimming hole, but I'm okay. I survived.
Well, and you ended up living to write one of the most beautiful sequences I think I've seen in a book. I'm obsessed with fireflies, and it just felt so magical to read about. And I think you captured this sense of, like, amazement with the world and what was possible. I almost felt like we were finally seeing the world through Paulie's eyes, this, like, pure vision of beauty that I thought was just incredible. This, like, trick. You tricked me into, like, feeling like a child again.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I appreciate it. Okay, so one of the most compelling characters in the book for me was Adeleine, and you mentioned her in what you were reading, and she's an example of being forced to change or accept change in your life in this book. And it was interesting to see each person in the novel going through some kind of realization or personal growth through force or trauma. And I felt her change was triumphant even if she didn't want it to happen. And I was curious if you could speak to that, or, like, what your larger project was with the novel in terms of, like, forced change. These questions are hard. I'm sorry. I love the book, so I was like, I'm going to ask a really, like,
I feel
weird,
like I
hard
should have
question.
received a spreadsheet or at least a Google Doc.
This is the last question, so make it good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's interesting is Adeleine's problems are very literal. She's an agoraphobe, and she's in a place that she can't get out of. And I don't know that I was like totally aware of the obvious nature of that. But I think that it was kind of, the other characters' problems are maybe a little bit more ineffable or nuanced, but I think she was kind of like the test of, like, the emotional veracity and like narrative sturdiness of the book. Like, if that didn't work out, it would have felt very hollow and underthought. So something I really thought and rethought and rethunk and thunk and rethunk. Yeah.
Okay, this is my last question.
All right.
What are you doing next?
I'm working on a novel that's about the intersection of Vietnam War activism and the American space program in the 60s, and it kind of gets bigger as the novel goes on. Like, there are more and more kind of voices, so it's tricky. I'm really enjoying it.
You love writing a lot of characters.
Yeah,
right?
I guess so.
It's hard to do. It's hard to balance. It's hard to juggle everybody, but I think, like, you've found a way to do it in a really good way, in a smart way.
What do you do when you have a lot of characters? Do you take notes?
Yeah, because sometimes I'll, like, forget the person's name, or I'll panic that I haven't given them enough page space, and so I'll go back. And this is the first time the book that I'm writing now, that I've actually gone back. Usually I'll just finish a first draft and then go back, but I'm finding myself going back in each chapter and filling out before I move forward. I don't know if it's a successful way to write, but I feel like it's necessary with how many characters I have.
Yeah. I remember, this is a very quick story, but once I went on like a very unsuccessful date with this very timid man, and he's like, "You're a novelist," and he had this shake in his voice, and I said, "Yeah." He was very sweet, and he said, "I could never do that," and I said, "Why couldn't you do that?" He was like a writer in his own right, and he said, "I could never name the characters." That was the scariest thing to him. And I thought that was so sweet.
That is it. Don't you find though that if you name a character the wrong name, it just feels so corny? Like you can't. They just seem like a corny character, and you're failing them by having the wrong name.
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes it takes a couple times, and like baby name websites. It's so terrible. Like there's no other resource or name directory than like baby names, which is like a weird space that I don't want to be on in the internet yet.
Popular baby names of 2015. I'll name this narrator Madison.
I'm going to name mine Perchance.
Brooklyn.
Okay, great.
Do you have any more questions?
Just want to have a few babies up here and have the audience name them. All right, great.
Does anyone have questions? Someone has to ask one question. Yes.
So you, in talking about your process, were referred to looking at security cameras.
Oh yeah.
To find like old characters that you had, as well as like being an insurance claim assessor for like a car that was damaged. And I thought
it's so funny because I didn't say insurance. You said insurance.
No, you didn't, but you were talking. Yeah,
I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
I'm wondering if insurance person would really not. Yeah.
Thomas, I don't have insurance.
Right.
I'm sorry. Please ask the question.
Are there like other roles like that you have to fill when you're doing it, where it's like you're less an author and more another profession when you're looking at your work? Or?
An assessor.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that well, I mean, I will say that like you have to double check a lot of your impulses. Some of my impulses are like very maudlin, or it's something that I'm like very much aware of. Like, has the feeling in this scene, been earned, or is that something that I'm like trying to, like, is it a couch that's too big for the room I'm trying to fit it into? So I'm thinking about that a lot, and I'm usually I read my work aloud a lot to think about rhythm and to think about like whether anything has been excessive. I don't know. It's like like any good cook like tastes his food along the way, which is something that I'm not even really good at doing when I'm cooking, but I'm getting a lot better at. So, but I have to do that in my writing a lot. Yeah.
John, do you have a question?
Don't do that to John.
How did you find your agent?
Oh.
I'm just kidding. I'll ask, how have you found, this is your second book. How have you found the experience from your first to second book? Or like just the experience of being an author and being in the world and putting your work out?
Well, I think it's like it's analogous to being in like a very hilly city and like not, the next mile is kind of like hidden from your view. I guess I was just driving around San Francisco this morning, so I'm thinking about that. But, I wanted to write my whole life, and to a certain extent I thought if I published a book, then I would be in this place I had always wanted to be. But really it's more like driving your car up a hill and then you see a place, like you just see that there's a few more miles for you to travel, and then there are another few miles. So you're never happy, and you're never quite doing the you're just always trying to, reach the full potential of your work, and it's less like getting somewhere definite than like, I don't know, I feel like I'm about to say something really embarrassing about journeys, and so I don't. I want to stop now. But I'm very happy with how this book turned out, and I feel lucky to. I think one of the greatest gifts of being a little bit more established is having a lot of friends such as yourself who are skilled writers and with whom I can speak about this sort of stuff all the time. It's very strange to be a writer who doesn't know very many other writers, and it's a much different experience now.
Yeah, I feel like you have people looking out for you, we writers, especially with the second book, like when people are looking forward to what you're coming up with next, like there's this sort of safety net of people who are all cheering for you that I think with the first book I didn't know what to expect and no one really knew who I was per se. Now there's this sense of like, oh, she's back. It's been like a few years. What does she come up with? And it seems like with each book you get more of an audience, so people expecting and waiting for what's next from you, which is interesting.
One would hope.
One would hope. Please keep reading our books. Yes.
I have a question.
I'm ready. Kathleen's ready for it. I'm ready for it.
So I've heard tell that you've been trying to get into Edwards Air Force Base for quite some time now. Every time you come to Los Angeles to do research for your next novel.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever get into Edwards Air Force Base? And is it important? If you don't, will you still be able to write about Edwards Air Force Base?
I think that like there's something about like my personality that they can just detect on the phone, these like military guys, because I've gotten into fights with them on the phone because I made a joke that they did not think was funny, and then they said it was a high security area. And
are you blackballed now? Did they write your name down somewhere?
I mean, the thing about having your name written down is that you don't know you've had your name written down, but I wouldn't be surprised. Well, I was like, he had said that I could come during this time and that he would save space for me if I couldn't come sooner, but then he didn't save the space for me. And so when I called, he's like, oh, now that tour's full. And I said, well, he's like, it's a van, and the van's only got so many spaces. So, and I said, well, sir, I could always just, step up on the back of the van. He's like, it is a high security area, ma'am, and that would be highly dangerous and would not look good for any of us. And then my name was written down.
Do you find that you have to go to the places that you're writing about? I guess this goes back to the research question. Like, do you feel that's necessary in order to write about a place?
I think it depends. For me, there's like the veracity of character is the first thing to check off. I mean, I think it depends circumstantially. So place by place, I guess.
Wow, 2 questions. Go on.
You have an energy that reminds me of Didion for some reason. I know that
that's great.
Essays or journalism.
I am actually sometimes.
Okay. So I feel like maybe this kind of like vibe of Didion of Brooklyn or something is circling. I'm just wondering, are there women writers? You have a very unique, intelligent, nervous kind of attack on things, and I'm just wondering, are there women writers that you look up to? Didion certainly had those qualities, and they're very unique. And even though Didion aged and continued to write, she had a youthful voice always to her writing and always attacking Air Force bases.
The question is, do I look up to any female writers?
Do you hear a voice out there that really speaks to you in terms of what you're trying to do?
Well, that's interesting. I think there are a lot of writers that I love who aren't necessarily my teachers, or at least in any way that I can detect. Joy Williams, who I mentioned earlier, who just has a collected book of stories that's just come out, which you should buy, writes these very surreal books that are absurdist at the surface level, but that are, emotionally are very disturbing. You can have things happen like, the dead wife returns to the bedroom of her widower and, replays fights that they've had in this very hilarious way. But it feels very real, and it feels true to us, even though that's not the world that we live in. Joe Williams is incredible. Alice Munro, I think is a great. Alice Munro is a great teacher, but she isn't someone who I'm emulating. It's funny how you mentioned I had a nervous energy, and then I broke the microphone.
Do you want mine?
No, I don't need a microphone. I really don't. It's fine.
You're really funny too. Is that is anybody? I love women don't really write humor. Maybe there are people I'm missing. I don't know.
There are plenty of women who write humor. You should read the New Yorker's Shouts and Murmurs section. That's very funny. I think that women, for very good reason, as a gender, we're afraid of not being taken seriously, and so I think a lot of women's first impulse is to write fiction with a capital F, or journalism with a capital J, or or whichever it is. But hopefully that's changing. But yeah, we can speak privately about my favorite humor writers later if you'd like. But you should look at Shouts and Murmurs, I think. Sure. Yeah.
But it's literary writers who write humor.
Sure. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, Joy Williams, who I mentioned, is very funny. Are you talking about people who are writing just humor?
No. I guess. Yeah. You can look at Joy Williams. She's a genius, but I wouldn't think of her as. You're really funny.
You are funny. I think she's very funny. But I think also, humor is different for all of us to we detect it in different ways, and we find it in different places, and some there are definitely those there are sometimes those jokes that we tell that we think are hilarious, and you tell it to a room of people, and they're like, that is so dark. What happened to you that you find that funny?
And probably people think that about A.M. Holmes. I think she's hilarious, but she's very dark.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
I love it, whatever you do. It's great.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. In the beginning of the book, you're bouncing between characters pretty much every 2 pages. And I was wondering if you wrote their histories one at a time and then blended them, or did you write it straight through?
No, what I would do, and I think that this was a way to sustain momentum, because when you're spending time with any one person, fictional or not, it's easy to get sick of them. So as a way to kind of it would be one part of my brain that was let me rephrase this. I would work on one character and then the next and then the next in a pretty steady rotation. But I think that kind of there would always be an implication, that needed some tinkering with, and I was allowed to kind of relax and think about that in a more, backroom kind of way as I was writing the next section. That's how that worked. Great.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you so much for coming, you guys, and thank you, Skylight, for hosting. Thanks a lot.